3 years?
Well, I think initially we were saying, we went into it with this absolutely with a flexible mindset. What got us going specifically on the Roxbury Memory Trail as a team was the National Endowment for the Arts grant. So I think a lot of time, even if you don't get a grant, it can be a really good catalyst for sort of solidifying this, right? But to answer your question, we said, well, our living vision for this is that it's a physical trail with, you know, a certain number of memorials, a phone app, and a platform, like a digital platform, like a website. Now we can make websites very easily, but in 2012 it wasn't that easy. So these were big goals, but we also understood that just as importantly, it was about in working with the community in a flexible way so that the outcomes might change and morph and become what the community actually needed it to be. And so now, again, those markers are still a goal. The phone app and the digital platform are still part of the process and still part of, you know, certainly outcomes. But I would say that art show was never on the table, and that might have been one of the most successful things, because that really engaged the entire community. Like, people could come in, school groups came in, there were like all kinds of conversations and master classes and you know, classroom projects, and so that wasn't even on our list, and then we did it in order to get sort of to address this, and to me that's success, right?
I think that's a great example of showing why that's important, because if you were to rely on the prefixed outcomes to gauge and assess and evaluate your success, in that situation you would not have succeeded technically, right? Because you did not make the app. But actually, you did succeed because something else happened that was actually what was supposed to happen. So having those flexible goals, be able to change and say, okay, well, we'll do the app next, but right now, this is really what we need to work on. And yes, we are succeeding. That is a better way to go about it than having those prescribed, like we have to meet this goal first and then that one next. Yep.
Someone said something to me, actually, I think it's the NVC, nonviolent communication model. There's no disagreement in needs. Where we start to get into conflict is around strategies. And strategies are about outcomes. So in other words, what needs is this vision saying? The need is about understanding and seeing and connecting to the history of Roxbury. You can do that in a million different ways. It doesn't have to be a trail. Where you hit up against difficulties is when you have to have a specific strategy, a specific outcome. Because then what if you can't get the right funder? What if you can't get, then you end up forcing things in, right? You force people to do certain things, you force partnerships that might not be viable, right? So if you, and this is really hard, this is when I said our methodology is a shift in thinking. It is a radical shift in thinking, but if we really want to create sustainable places, we have to move from strategies and outcomes to working with the needs.
So I have a question.
Yes.
So you have a specific vision that...
It's not me, it's the community.
It's the community, yeah. And then you have a group of people around who support
They're
that
the
vision.
Stewards.
Yeah.
They're like the torch holders.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The vision kind of bubbled up from this group of strategics.
No, actually this bubbled up from the entire community.
Right, and then it attracts the strategic kind of stewardship.
But you need the...
But what I'm thinking in terms of the team building is, okay, so you decide you want to do Roxbury Trail. Some community members may not be interested in that. They're interested in a specific goal. So how do you navigate between one, you start with a bigger vision, and then there are tiny visions or tiny project that comes along the way, and you incorporate them. How do you first get the people who come and go, and then the stewards who are in charge? How do you get all of these people to say, okay, we are shifting focus for a bit, we are going to do this and come back? How do you navigate it when you are building this team to move forward?
Well, so we talked about this earlier. Our experience, and I would say this is in, dozens of projects, is quasi if if the vision is actually strong enough, if it really is if it's one of those ones that's not, I think so many of our visions are small visions. They're not going to hold people, and they're not going to attract people for the long term.
Yeah.
They have to be deep, like level, big level, and I don't have a better term for this, vision that's like, no, this has to happen. This is what we're used to working with, and that this may not be the kind of team that you're looking at. I have no idea, but for us, like this trail, not one person we've ever talked to has said, no, you shouldn't do it.
Well, that's sort of what you said at the beginning, is that it's like, it's whatever is just omnipresent in the community, like bubbling up everywhere, is what that vision is.
Is what this
it's
is.
whatever is everyone's talking about. Yeah.
So this is the kind of project that we do generally, or because it's like the projects that need to happen that often are, you know, everyone's sort of saying, yeah, we need, like if you go into a community and listen, you'll hear the same thing over and over again. Oh yeah, we need this. Oh yeah, we need this. Worcester, perfect example. It's a city where you have to drive everywhere, and everyone, I mean, literally everyone I've ever talked to said we need a walkable area of Worcester. I mean, like, I've talked with thousands of people. Yes, we need a walkable area of Worcester. That would be a really good project to focus on, right? I bet I could find easily, you know, 8 to 10 people who wanted to steward that process. Now, things do come up. People do have to come in and out of this. But if this is strong enough, you're going to attract your people, and you're not going to have to convince. This group, you don't want to convince them. They're there because they're committed, whether or not there's money. And that's why I was saying, the kinds of people who tend to do well here are people who have led efforts in the community for a long time. They know how to stick, right? They're college or post-college students with a lot of energy, and they're going to be around for a little while because they're in their school, and they're going to show up. You know, you can kind of tell. People who have retired, who have extra time, but who have a lot of knowledge, but who are really committed to this. And yes, this group can morph and change, but if you're not forcing this, you'll find those people. They'll just come.
It's interesting that there are some people who are who have those ideas, who are maybe early leaders, like that guy in the 90s. He saw that earlier. But it wasn't the right time, right moment. So I think you are talking about that.
Yeah,
maybe
that.
Yeah.
How do you? I want to understand because as we are building the team, how do we go through this? Yes, if you have a very great idea and in the community people come and go and the turnover is too high, then they will say the idea is not the right time. That's why they didn't succeed.
And that can happen. Yeah.
And so. I want to know from your experience building this team, how do you grow the team, like, and then where do the stewards play a strong role? Where do you rely on, as you said, people come in and go? People take it to their communities, they bring it back. How do you build
manage that?
Yeah, manage that.
Well, first of all, we're only one of a group, so we're not leading.
Okay.
We're part. So we were saying you need a catalyst, right? Something that makes something that's sort of alive in the community become very clear. So it's like, okay, yeah, we want, you know, it's clear there. And I think what happened here was that in talking with Bob Hector, he had been trying to get this trail going in the 90s, but had run up against actually issues with the city and getting approval. So it was a technical issue. It wasn't about the community. And then we were like, okay, well, I think we know some other people who might be interested in, because we had been talking to so many people in the community, and we're like, well, you know, the executive director of the National Museum for Afro-American Artists has been talking about this a lot. Let's see if he wants to be on this stewardship committee. It was a resounding yes. Then we talked to, actually, in talking with the executive director of the Main Streets program, they said, well, yeah, we're interested in shifting from a sustainability plan that maybe focuses on how to build the main streets through small local businesses. we could focus on creating this trail that then would bring tourists that would then also help build the main streets. So yes, we're in. This benefits us. And we understand this bigger vision. Maybe this story helps. Then there's the Neighborhood Development Corporation led by Sister Virginia. And she's like, I want my grandkids to know this history. It makes me so angry that they can't come to Roxbury. They're seeing, what they're seeing is trash on the street rather than this incredible history that's here, that's in my mind when I look at Roxbury. I want that to be visible. I'm in. Not only am I in, but I'm a key administrator. So she was the host organization. So yes, there has to be a host organization. Then we have, let's see if we can, Joyce Stanley. Oh, she said, I know who else needs to be on this stewardship group. Joyce Stanley. She knows everything about the history of Roxbury, and she's the executive director of the Main Streets program on the other part of Roxbury. This woman is an amateur, seriously, she calls herself an amateur historian. She knows more than the professionals. Unbelievable, her understanding of the history of Roxbury. Plus her network, the people she knows is astounding. And they do, that Main Streets does, is part of a larger group that does tours of Roxbury. So this then connects to the tour group, right? So each of these individuals not only said absolutely yes, but then they connected to their groups. Really, if we were to do a map of this, probably thousands of organizations are touched by this project just because these people said, yes, I'm doing this.
What was the first gathering like?
So we had been doing these little sort of almost salon type gatherings where we would, the sustainability vision plan process, where we would talk with one person and they're like, you should talk to this person, and then it would be like a group of us like this. I think a lot of what happens in the world that's meaningful happens this way. And then it sort of became clear more and more who those core people were, and so we said, why don't we just have a meeting? That's simple, right? And then this is one of the things that I can kind of bring to the table, right? We each bring something. This is what I can bring is grant writing. That's one of my areas. I started looking for grants, and then New England, I have a National Endowment for the Arts. There was a grant that fit our project perfectly, and we started to put it together. A couple of things made it so we couldn't submit that one, but then when the next one came up 6 months later, we had the proposal, and then we got it. But we were going to keep going with or without that grant.
That's important.
So am I answering? Yeah. Well, am I answering your question?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So, but the thing is that there's times that things seem to be bubbling to the surface, and it isn't the right time, or you're missing a steward because each of us at the table brought something different. And sometimes you might need a good grant writer, or you might need but you want someone at the table that's not just a technocrat. They have to be committed to this. But what you could do is this person could say, I have a grant writer person who could help us out, right? So this is the steward, and this is the person who says, let me see, I have a friend who might be able to donate some time. Right?
So did you need examples from other communities to show them this is important or something like that? Maybe that's your question. Do you need to show them that your idea is working in some other places?
I think that's often more the people who are outside of this circle. Although I do think sometimes if someone is in the community who's interested in this, but you want to help sort of solidify it, I think you can use visuals. Yes, so certainly this is a process. And what this looks like, this can include grants can catalyze, examples, certainly yes, I would say yes, like case studies,
Case
But again, you don't want to have to do too much convincing. You want to be like, if you have to do too much convincing, that's a person who's maybe out on the periphery who can come in at strategic times. You want people who like they're in, like their soul is there. They're like fully there, all parts of them.
So the people whose soul is already there, right? And they have their full-time job, like
yes,
all of them.
We all did, by the way.
Yes,
we all did.
Yes. So how do each person commit their time? How is effort measured in order to know? Okay, so for instance, I can write grants. She can do fundraising. You can contact other people.
Yeah.
But how do you manage everyone or time everyone such that each person is contributing meaningfully or effectively to the mission?
I think what I figured out, you need to find those people, like to talk with as much people as you can, because there are some people who don't want to miss a chance to be part of that. And
yeah, so my question is, they're already part of, they want to be part,
but
then how do we measure and help them?
So we didn't measure. They each gave what they could.
Yeah, okay.
And so
I think that makes you think of the idea that we talk about of the team as a living system. So we just sort of operate the team as as a living system. So like, I mean, owls are only awake at night. Like, they're only going to be available at night. So it's like that's when they're contributing. Or that's how we think about.
That was an amazing example. So
yeah, that's how we think about it.
We had agreed. There were pieces of this that you missed that we probably should go back over. But we had agreed that we would meet once a month, and then we would have in person, and that we would have phone calls throughout the month if we were working on specific things. Okay. But we had people this was in Roxbury, and so we had people coming from all over the region, or at least some of the team members were coming. We had people who could only meet early in the morning, and some who just really weren't morning people. Like you said, they were owls. And so we had to just work through it. And like, it would just be like, well, I can do this. And then everyone would kind of shift themselves a little bit. This vision will get the best out of people if it's the right one. And I really believe this. And so it is a matter of having this be the right one and having the right stewardship team. But I do think that there's something that, if it's a deep enough vision, it's like a magnet. It will happen. And I think so I think our Western outcome mindset, which is, this is what we're going to do, and we're going to make everything fit to it.
Yeah, it goes back
That's
to flexible
not what
goals.
this is.
We have flexible goals. So like what you're talking about, it's like we don't actually have to necessarily like meet all these deadlines and outcomes and have everything be fixed and measured. It's like, this is more about an organic process, a living system where everyone has other things going on, has other jobs, but like Sarah's saying, they're all drawn very strongly to this one idea that it's going to happen in an organic way with flexible goals and outcomes in like this living systems kind of process. And it might take a little bit longer than if you were to just like buckle down and have a hierarchy and meet your deadlines on time, but it's going to be a more effective. The outcome in this way, I think, is going to be better, higher quality, more effective, more true to the purpose and the vision than it would be if you were to just buckle down and have a consultant come in and like assign you a project, a strategic plan, and
And if you do that consultant from the outside, it's not going to be a community.
Right.
It's not going to be of the community, right? And in this case, so you have, we said at least 70% are of the community with some allies, and then you also can have allies that are outside of this that are, from around the region. But because you have that, and then you have a process of engaging the community in those ongoing conversations, the whole entire community takes it on. And it shows up in so many different ways. The challenge with this way of approaching it is that it is harder to think about, I'm an organization, I have to fund myself a certain way. So it's really vision-based, not funding-based. And so if you say, we're going to make this happen, and then, things might spin off, like we were saying, community members come in, participate, they see it as benefiting them, and then they might go and take pieces of this to use for their own mission. But that's the idea, is that this is such a resounding idea that there's no scarcity mind in it, right? Like creating a Roxbury memory trail, this is only win-win-win, right? Because you're creating, like, this high school teacher comes in, participates, learns, and then takes it into her classroom, right? That's easy.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
Future generation, would they see who was engaged in this project, like names or
Well,
something
so
like that?
that's interesting, and we're actually hitting this point. So, like we said, this team worked together for from 2012 to about 2017. And then a couple of the organizations, some of the people around here, particularly some of the administrator, people who are focusing on the administration, had to focus more on their organizations. And I'm gonna include myself in that. I was one of them. So the project, in terms of creating the Roxbury Memory Trail, kind of sputtered for a little bit, but it was still there strongly as a vision, and none of us had really dropped it. We just couldn't put time to it for a little while, but we were trying to find the resources to keep it going, all of us. We were all still holding it. So we actually found the resources to help keep it going. Hi Phil, welcome, thank you for joining us. There's wine and pizza.
Unfortunately, I've been
So that was what I was
salted
afraid
away
of.
upstairs
Like, if there
working on
is,
things.
if people are flexible with their timing, versus when you have a firm structure,
Yeah,
then there's continuity. Like, if someone wants to drop
Yeah.
out, you can say, okay, we are ready to replace someone. Can someone take over?
so you might need to find, so depending on your project, and I think this is what we've kind of found. And I think we have we have iterated ourselves as a team, so now we have, I think, solved this problem. And I can tell you that in a second. But if that's essential to your project, and I think it is to ours too, then that needs to be a big part of the structure that you create. It's like you're coming together, you're gonna say, okay, we need somebody to be able to put at least 25% of their time into administering this project every week. A priority for us is to get that funded in some way, right? And then you can figure out that. We didn't really have that foresight, but I think the way we're doing it now is that there are a couple of organizations that the executive directors or the presidents of the boards can put in some time, and then we're getting interns in who are helping us to continue some of the programming. And so even though we don't have funding for this, it is something that meets students' needs, like especially design students' needs. They need to get that experience, and it is a kind of an advanced design experience. They get to jump in a project on a pretty high level, so it serves their needs as well. So I think that's part of this. This is not a fixed model, right? So it's saying you just need to have there needs to be a catalyst, there needs to be a clear vision, there needs to be a stewardship team, and then you have to create that table that you need, whatever that table is. And in our case, we had one, it worked for a while and then it didn't, so then we had to reinvent it. And we're probably gonna have to reinvent it again.
And that goes back
honestly.
to the point of the team being a living system. It has to adapt and evolve to be resilient.
Resilient,
It's not
place-based
gonna-
resiliency,
It's
right
not
here.
going to be this rigid and static. Yeah.
What was the first milestone?
First milestone.
Yeah.
Oh, so you keep bringing us back to that kind of thinking, don't you? I think the first milestone was creating this table. I mean, these are the first milestones. Because you can't do anything unless this is functioning well. And then it's out of this, and then I would also say then you need the ongoing community conversations, events, and I'm not going to use the word engagement because I don't like that word. To me, it's really ongoing community conversations and co-creation. So this is really a co-creation model. It's not, you notice like Earthos is just one of and we obviously had a very important role in it. And you know, when you asked about case studies, examples, visuals, I mean, Phil was really a visual leader on the team, which helped attract and help people understand the project, which then helped it continue to, you know, solidify and glow. But no one was saying, I'm in charge. This is, and we created timelines and milestones, but like I said, they were fluid. It was, well, the NIFA, a grant came across our table that said, that offered an opportunity to hire local artists to take pictures of these sites. Okay, so well, maybe we made less headway on the phone app, but now we have pictures to use on the phone app, and we have this giant community conversation that's happening, and we hired local artists. I mean, oh my gosh! All of a sudden, those milestones change, right?
And it's still successful.
You're
not failing because you didn't meet the prescribed outcome.
This is still happening. This idea of having living history available to the community and future generations, it's still there, right?
You're pointing at that red thing that has kind of faded away.
Yeah, I'm afraid that we are using what we have. It was brighter in the daylight. So this is a shift in thinking, and we also, so this is team building in partnership, like creating sort of larger community projects. We also have a team building process within our organization, but that's a whole nother presentation. But it's still using that living systems model. It really does shift your thinking. It's not saying milestones aren't important, it's just not putting them as the most important thing. It's saying, okay, they're there, but we might do this instead.
But I was thinking, like, what was really meaningful thing that you done? You said, like, we done this, we are moving forward.
Well, we're always moving forward, I think. I think it's really meaningful. Every single time this group meets, the conversations are unbelievably deep about the history. It's like, I want, actually, this is something in the future, those should be recorded and should be put on the digital platform, made available to people. Because in this day and age, the process is as important as the product, right? It becomes the product, it becomes the content. And so looking back, if we'd had either that foresight or just what we have today, because I think 2019, a lot of stuff is on YouTube. Then it wasn't the same thing. You weren't sharing in that same kind of way. But sharing this process, bringing people into that, kind of like what we're doing here, invaluable. Like I wanted like everyone to see those meetings. So that was incredibly, if you want to talk about something meaningful. The other thing is doing that art exhibit was not just the art exhibit, but all of the activities that happened around those art exhibits. Actually, there were a number of them. And those aren't just milestones for the project. For me, those are like important moments in my entire life because of who they brought together and what they made happen. And I'm just trying to think of and you helped make one of them happen. They were just incredibly moving because people were starting to see the beauty in their community, what they had wanted to see for so long, and it's all of a sudden it's there, you know. And oh my gosh, and yeah, I'm getting the
So in this structure,
yes.
Do you form another umbrella structure because you have your individual organizations?
You can.
And so what worked for you, your team? Did you just have the overarching idea and you just work towards it, but you didn't form like another umbrella to say, okay, this umbrella is this new organization and our goal is to complete this project or to do this? How did that team
How did that happen?
Yeah.
So what does this look like, right?
Yes.
Okay, so for us, we just called ourselves the Roxbury Memory Steering Committee. That was it. So you can create a coalition, you could create another organization, but this was a steering committee, and then one organization kind of was the, what is it called when you have a nonprofit who you can...
Sponsor?
It was the sponsor. There's another term for it that it's eluding me at the moment. artists often will go to nonprofits and have them.
Principal investigator.
Well, yeah, that would be for a grant. Anyway, so yeah, so they were really the grants went through them. But like and when we went for the grants would look at, okay, what are the program activities that we want to do? What can each of the organizations do? And then how much should they get based on kind of what the typical market is. But like, again, we're all at that table regardless. So we didn't fight over that, you know. And you just keep looking for different grants that enable you to do different things, different funding sources. But it is helpful. And, you know, so now it was Grove Hall, let's say, so this was Grove Hall, this was Grove Hall Neighborhood Development Corporation. That organization hasn't been able to play that role the last couple of years, so now it's Grove Hall Main Streets. So it's shifted, which is fine. And so, like I said, we had to sort of reinvent this to keep it going. That living systems, adapt, resilient, right? So that's the thing, when you have all these different organizations, you have the capacity to adapt when you're not like, I have to do this. The other thing is that, and I do think this is generally like any ecosystem, you don't necessarily want two organizations that are doing exactly the same thing, unless you do the same thing and you take on different roles, just so that way you're not because like if you are going after a grant or funding together, it's helpful to be like, well, that's your this is what I'm doing, that's what you're doing, and minimizes identifying roles regardless of what your mission is. So that's important. That's part of, I feel like this is a huge part. Roles is really important.
But how can you decide which organization do you need? Like, you are picking up organization.
Well, so I don't think it's like necessarily only you, because this is moving out of like one organization as the leader. This is the vision. Who needs to be at the table?
The people who are coming anyway. Yeah.
That's right.
And generally, you won't have more than, I mean, you're going to end up with a lot of people in the room around the conversations around this. But when it really comes to making the project happen, only so many people are going to stay through at every monthly meeting and actually showing up and having to do stuff for it, right? I do think, well, I told you the story of how our team gelled, right? So it wasn't a call out to the whole community. It was kind of identifying those leaders who understood, knew the vision, had been stewarding it in some way, or had been talking about it. Because you kind of do want people who are leaders and who can hold something that's more than themselves and more than their organization. And you do. There's a cultivation in this. There is a cultivation in that. Does that make sense? A person who can hold more than their own needs, right?
Actually, there's a contrast with that, which was the Indigo Line Task Force was funded by
contrast. This is good, yeah.
By the Boston Foundation, and they brought in all the various CDCs, nonprofits, and so on that were interested in the subject, which extends all the way from South Station out to the edge of the city, basically in the south. It's the only commercial or commuter rail line that's actually entirely within the city limits of Boston. And there was an awful lot of good conversation about things to do and this and that, which then was followed by gridlock between all the different organizations. So either you have a strong core that's a small group.
Yeah, it needs to be fairly small.
That is able to work with consensus. You'll have a situation where even though a fair amount of money is funding what people are doing and a system of meetings, and when you get 40 or 50 people involved, it's very, very difficult to create consensus among all the different charters
And Phil, so
that
what you're
come into the
talking,
room, because you're now looking at 50 organizations and 2 or 3 individuals who actually want to be on the ground and do something. So there is some leadership in that. But what they find is that they're unable to create a powerful overall consensus within such a large group. So the Boston Foundation is paying for people to spin a lot of wheels and not really go anywhere. So I think that this smaller effort and the trail, which it starts out with a very clear objective. We want to build this trail. We want to celebrate the history of this neighborhood, and so on. So before you're saying more generalized things like, let's create a river of opportunity along the Indigo line,
right,
and everybody says, oh yeah, great, and here's how I'm gonna do it, and here's how you're gonna do it, and here's how you're gonna do it, and pretty soon we're saying, well, yeah, but
right.
those are not the same things. So,
It was too broad, so that,
It's
like
too
we said,
broad.
it has to be something that's deep, it resonates. It actually has clear purpose, and it's something you can do. So there, I guess it does. There is this like back and forth between process and milestones.
Yeah, it's like what you're trying to do with your group is build a very specific thing.
Yeah, that can draw. You can draw.
This is the Institute of Technology, period. That's what we're doing.
Well, and I imagine with
So that
yours,
has a
you're
certain clarity.
hearing that from a lot of different arenas. So this is very much alive for both of you from what we've heard, right? And I don't know where you are with this, but as Phil, there was something you said, Phil, that I thought, oh yeah, with the contrast, the Fairmont process. The thing about it is that many of the people who were in the room did not know how to do consensus building and did not know how to think of themselves. This is important. My organization's important, but this has to happen. This has to happen. I'm not going to look at this through my organization's need. My organization's here, and this is something that still has to happen. And if this happens, regardless of what happens with my organization, it's going to help me. You see what I mean? So they were involved in that process because they wanted to get something out of it, rather than give to it, so that when it exists, it can actually then also benefit them, which is looking at the community as a living system. So this is going back to that idea again of a living system.
Phil touched on the question I was going to ask about. What is a good size of like the core group? And then I also think there are people who come in and go. What would be a decent number? Because if you have a lot of people coming in and go, there is too much moving parts. And then if you have, like, let's say you have only 2 core people and there are about 10, 15 people coming in and going, they will tend to override the core. And then if you have such a big core, it's difficult to have a consensus. So how do you
have to design this,
work on this model?
So you have to, so like, right. So with us, and again, I keep coming back, just the Roxbury Memory Trail to me is a really good example. So somewhere between 7 and 10, you need enough, so there's enough sort of people and resources that are coming in, but you don't really want more than this, because if you have more than 10 and you're all trying to find the same times to meet, it's hard enough with 3 of us, right? So it's around, I wouldn't put like a solid, like no more and no less, but around that.
Like a soccer team size.
Well, it's the Margaret Mead model, right? It's just a few, it takes just a few people to make a change in the world, that concept. So yeah, it takes all of us ultimately, but to have a stewardship team is sort of the Margaret Mead model.
I think also just enough people so that it's actually representative of the community. You don't want to have like a clique or a subset or a dominant group or a minority group or something. You want like a representative team, diverse team. Yeah.
and you have to work, it's a living system, so you have to work well together.
So is it like it happened organically, like?
No, we cultivated it.
Uh-huh.
So it was through conversation. It was again that deep
That's
listening and the conversations and the.
And who is showing up regularly?
Well, who said yes, I'm in, and
Uh-huh.
who showed up, and who like sort of Sister Virginia said, you got to talk with my, my friend and executive director of this organization down the street. She's amazing, right? Joyce Stanley. So again, it's all through. It's like it's through conversation and discernment, and you can. It's like there's a yes. Like instead of someone showing up and being like, well, what is this going to do for me, right? That would be the kind of question where you're like, this may not be the best steward. It might be a good, collaborator, but not necessarily a steward.
That's it. Yeah.
And then to your point, and I think this is really important, and I would say there's always room for improvement here, you do need to sort of design this process. So there are some times when you want more intimate, so you can quote unquote focus groups. You can have sort of smaller conversations where you have a number of them around. You can have larger ones like the art exhibits were great because you can have a ton of people come and they have their own informal conversations. You just walk around and listen to people. It's really amazing. But that's where you can engage actually thousands of people, right? So you can design this together, but your ear is always deeply listening all the way through the process.
It's a constant evaluative process. You're never done. You're constantly assessing, reassessing, and changing if necessary, and evolving and adapting.
Yeah, but you need to create like safe space.
Yes, so
Yeah.
that's really, so initially you're really working on how this group is interacting. Remember, it took us some time to figure ourselves out.
Well, it's also true that some of the key people in, let's say, the old guard of Roxbury are people that we've known for 30
That
years,
helped.
40 years, and so
Yes.
on. And where you come from, you have sort of history of the place, a knowledge of people, and so forth and so on, so that you're able to move in ways that a native can move, right? And doing what you're trying to do. So if you have been involved in a neighborhood for as long as we have, which is a long time, you have a variety of different types of friendships and so forth. And so I was talking to Ed Gaskin tonight about, we had developed this idea of the art farm for Somerville. And he has sort of said, we need this in Roxbury, in Grove Hall, across from the library. And then, so we pitched that idea and people said, oh, well, that means it has to be a kind of a multi-use park. So they said, we'll get D&D to transfer the land over to the Parks Department, which was kind of the death of the whole idea, because first thing the Parks Department did was to say, we don't know anything about this and we're not going to do the community interaction and all that stuff. So we'll bring in the Public Land Trust. And so the next thing Ed knew, he was the one black guy in the room full of white guys from elsewhere who knew nothing about Roxbury.
Making
right?
decisions about a public asset
And had not talked
Roxbury.
to the group of artists that had been assembled to talk about the art farm and all that sort of thing by Barry Gaither, who's the director of the Museum of African American Artists, that have been, over the last century involved in Roxbury, Grove Hall. So then he had to start a kind of counter offensive to say, wait a minute, we have to get control of this. So he went back to Sheila at D&D and said, what if we don't give this land to the Parks Department?
Yeah.
Because now people are saying what we want is everything about the art farm, but we want artist housing.
So this is the coming from the
In it,
community,
on
right?
it, whatever. And everybody's getting worked up about that idea from within a conversation that's completely separate from,
The
land
city.
trust and all that stuff in the Parks Department. And so I'm saying to Ed, this is great, continue talking with Sheila and say, what we need to do is find the right development entity to do this mixed use combination of
Community-based.
artist housing that is a new iteration of Artist Tenants of the South End, or one of those programs which subsidize artists not to rent units, to buy units. My sister was one of those, my younger sister. And they bought the unit with some support from the BRA, from the city itself. And then after 12 years, when they decided to move
Team
on
building.
and sold it,
Topic.
they were able to benefit from the equity that had been built in Harry the Greek's building, in the South End. So that's the kind of direction that the artist community of Roxbury would like to go in.
Well, it's asset building, and that's what you're both doing. You're like, there's so much in there's so much like, it's like you're looking at how do you bring all that latent potential into something that can become a real asset, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what this group was committed to, and what you're saying, you're explaining.
This is a new thing that's
right, but
percolating.
So I feel like I have been the center of today's thing, and I don't want to. That's not never my intention.
But it's good. We
Yeah.
get a good insight on the various ways of building teams, because our individual teams are all based on what we are doing and
Yeah.
the people around. But this is more of looking at it from a broader perspective of how do you bring different people, different groups, not just people, but groups, and how do you work together to accomplish. So I think it is nice for us to learn more about this process. Because for instance, if you are collaborating with someone, maybe in Ghana there's an organization we are collaborating, we don't have a clear way of doing it. So this is a process that will help us to think of, okay, so we need to first know there's a clear vision of what we are going to contribute our effort to, and not just join the team and like, oh, what are we doing? So I think this gives us a different perspective on how to build a team.
Well, and Kwasi, thank you for that. And one of the things I was just thinking about, like your project, is that you are actually, both of you, you're both tapping into not only right where you are, but in an entire region, right? And one of the things you were talking about earlier today, Mirella, is that you're starting to build collaborations with other communities towards kind of like this bioregional artists economy.
Not just artists, but other professionals and other groups and other organizations.
So you are doing this at a regional level, or starting to, right? And Kwasi, when I think about what you're doing, you have a center. That center, you're really looking at it within a West African context.
Yeah.
So I could almost, and you may already be doing this, but I could see you having a coalition of people who are then also, like we said, then bringing it back to where they are in West Africa. And you may be already going here. I'm just thinking of how this could then apply to. So you start to create like a coalition or a group that really wants to see scientific capacity in West Africa. You're doing one thing, but then you're helping them to do it in other places.
Yeah.
That would be an application of this. So we had said until 8. Any other thoughts? Do you want to take some time to do did you both have presentations, or you could go if you wanted, Okay. Where do we want to take it? Or
I don't know if we can still workshop.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah.